My daughter-in-law changed the locks while I was away. I discovered it at 6:15 on a rainy Thursday evening, standing on my own front porch with 2 grocery bags cutting into my fingers. The brass key I had used for 27 years slid into the lock, but it would not turn. I tried again. Nothing. At first, I thought the mechanism had jammed. Then the porch light came on. My daughter-in-law, Brooke, appeared behind the glass. She did not open the door. Instead, she looked at me through the narrow window beside it and said, "You weren't supposed to be back until Saturday." I set the groceries down. "Why doesn't my key work?" Brooke folded her arms. "We changed the locks." I stared at her. "You changed the locks on my house." She finally opened the door, but only a few inches. A security chain stretched across the gap. Behind her, I could see new furniture in my living room. My husband's chair was gone. The family photographs had been removed from the wall. A large television now covered the place where our wedding portrait had hung for more than 30 years. Brooke lowered her voice. "Daniel and I thought it would be easier to handle this before you got back." "Handle what?" "The transition." I looked past her. 2 suitcases stood near the staircase. "Not mine." "Hers." Then my son walked into the hallway. Daniel would not meet my eyes. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk. You can start by opening this door." He glanced at Brooke. That glance told me everything. My son was 41 years old, but in that moment, he looked like a boy waiting for someone else to decide whether he was allowed to obey his mother. Brooke spoke first. "The house belongs to Daniel now." I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because the confidence in her voice was so complete. She believed she had already won. I looked at my son. "Is that what you believe?" He swallowed. "Dad left it to me." My husband had been dead for 4 months. I had spent the previous week in Tennessee, helping my younger sister recover from surgery. While I was away, my son and his wife entered my home, removed my belongings, changed the locks, and moved in. They believed my husband's will gave them the right. I did not argue on the porch. I did not force the door. I picked up my groceries, carried them back to the car, and said, "All right." Brooke relaxed. Daniel looked relieved. They mistook my restraint for defeat. What they did not know was that the house had never belonged to my husband. And buried inside a metal file box at my sister's home was the original deed that proved it. My name is Evelyn Mercer. I was 68 years old when my son locked me out of my own house. The property sat on 4 acres outside Asheville, North Carolina. It was a 2-story farmhouse with gray siding, green shutters, and a wide porch that faced the Blue Ridge Mountains. The house was not grand. The floors creaked. The upstairs bathroom pipes groaned in winter. The kitchen cabinets had been painted 3 times because I could never settle on the right shade of white. But every corner of that house contained part of my life. My parents, Arthur and June Bennett, bought the land when I was 11. Back then, the farmhouse was smaller. My father added the 2nd floor himself with help from 2 uncles and a neighbor who accepted payment in firewood. My mother planted apple trees behind the barn. I married my husband, Paul, under the largest one. After my parents died, the house became mine. Not ours. Mine. Paul understood that from the beginning. He never resented it. He used to joke that he had married into a good roof and a stubborn mortgage-free woman. We were married for 36 years. Paul worked as a building inspector for the county. I taught elementary school. We raised Daniel in that house. He learned to ride a bike on the gravel drive. He built forts in the woods. He carved his initials into the bottom step of the porch when he was 12 and denied it until he was 25. For most of his life, Daniel loved the place. Then he married Brooke. I did not dislike her at first. Brooke was confident, energetic, and polished. She worked in interior design and knew how to make ordinary rooms look expensive. She noticed details other people missed. At our first dinner together, she complimented the original wood trim. The second time she visited, she asked whether we had ever considered removing the wall between the kitchen and dining room. By the time she and Daniel became engaged, she had mentally renovated the entire house. I found it amusing. Paul did not. She talks about this place like she is preparing a bid, he said one evening. She is an interior designer. She is also dating our son. You think she wants the house? I think she wants many things. Paul was cautious by nature. He spent his career inspecting buildings other people had rushed to finish. He noticed cracks before anyone else did. I tended to see the best in people. That difference balanced us for years. After Daniel and Brooke married, they bought a modern home closer to the city. It had tall windows, an open floor plan, and a kitchen that looked as if no one had ever cooked in it. They borrowed heavily to buy it. Then Brooke started a design studio. The business did well at first. She worked with contractors, vacation rental owners, and wealthy clients moving into the area. Daniel left his job in logistics to help manage the company. Paul advised against it. One stable income is useful when the other one depends on trends, he told him. Daniel became defensive. You never took risks. Paul looked around our farmhouse. I took risks, I just knew which roof would fall on me if they failed. The business expanded quickly. So did their spending. They leased a larger studio. They hired employees. They purchased a luxury SUV because Brooke said clients expected a certain image. When interest rates rose and the housing market slowed, their projects began disappearing. They did not tell us how serious the problem had become. Instead, they started visiting more often. Brooke walked through our home, pointing out what could be modernized. Daniel asked whether we had considered moving into a smaller place. Paul always gave the same answer. No. The questions became more direct after Paul's health declined. He was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis 2 years before he died. At first, he needed oxygen only at night. Later, the machine followed him from room to room. Daniel visited more frequently, but Brooke often came with him. She asked about insurance. She asked about the will. She asked whether the property had ever been appraised. One afternoon, while Paul was sleeping, Brooke stood beside the kitchen window and looked toward the mountains. This land alone must be worth a fortune, she said. It is worth more to me as a home. Of course, but eventually someone will have to make practical decisions. Eventually is not today. She smiled. I didn't mean anything by it. But she did. 3 months before Paul died, Daniel came to the house alone. He sat at our dining table and told us he and Brooke were facing a cash flow problem. Their studio owed contractors. A commercial lease payment was overdue. They needed $150,000. Paul did not respond immediately. Daniel turned to me. We could secure it against the property. I felt my stomach tighten. What property? This house. Paul removed his oxygen tube and placed it carefully on the table. No. Daniel's voice rose. You haven't even heard the terms. I heard enough. We would repay it. With what? The business is recovering. Then let the business secure the loan. The bank wants real estate. This real estate is not available. Daniel looked at me. Mom. I shook my head. No. His face hardened. Someday this house will come to me anyway. Paul's expression changed. Do not ever say that again. I'm your only child. That does not make your mother's home an advance on your inheritance. Daniel stood. You too would rather watch us lose everything than help. Paul put the oxygen tube back beneath his nose. We have helped you many times. We will not gamble Evelyn's security on a business neither of you can stabilize. Daniel left without saying goodbye. For several weeks, he did not call. Then Paul's health worsened. Daniel returned. He apologized. He brought groceries and helped repair a broken gate. I wanted to believe the argument had frightened him into maturity. Paul remained suspicious. One night, after Daniel and Brooke left, Paul asked me to sit with him in the study. He opened a drawer and removed a copy of his will. I want you to understand something, he said. You have explained the will before. Not all of it. He showed me the section leaving Daniel his truck, woodworking tools, investment account, and the remainder of his personal estate after my share. Then he pointed to a sentence describing his interest in the marital residence. "I don't have an ownership interest in this house," he said. "I know. But Daniel may not. Why would he think you do?" "Because years ago, I told him the home would probably be his someday." That was true. It was an assumption, not a promise. Paul took a breath. His illness made long conversations difficult. "I never asked to be added to the deed. Your parents left this property to you. The county records show you as sole owner." "I remember. The original deed is still in the metal file box." "At the bank." He shook his head. "At your sister S." That surprised me. Paul explained that 6 months earlier, after Daniel asked about using the house as collateral, he had moved several original documents to my sister Ruth's home. He did not believe Daniel would steal anything, but he believed grief created opportunities for confusion. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I did not want to frighten you." "You are frightening me now." He reached for my hand. "Then remember this, no one can inherit from me what I never owned." Paul died in February. His final months were difficult. Daniel was attentive. Brooke was helpful. They arranged oxygen deliveries, cleaned the gutters, and drove us to appointments. Their kindness made me feel guilty for remembering the loan request. Perhaps I thought Paul had been too suspicious. Perhaps illness had made both of us guarded. After the funeral, Daniel met with the estate attorney. I did not attend the first meeting because I was exhausted. That decision created the opening Brooke needed. Paul's will referred to his personal interest in our residence, if any, passing to me. It was standard language. Daniel saw the phrase "our residence" and decided his father must have owned part of the house. Brooke decided that, because I already received my legal share of Paul's estate, Daniel would eventually receive the property. Their reasoning was wrong, but they repeated it until it sounded official. Brooke began saying, "When the title transfers." Daniel began saying, "Dad left me the family property." I corrected him once. "This house came from my parents." He answered, "But Dad lived here for 36 years. As though time created ownership. I should have contacted the attorney immediately. Instead, I avoided conflict. I was grieving. I did not want another argument with my only child. That silence cost me. 2 months after Paul's death, my sister Ruth needed hip surgery. She lived outside Knoxville and had no children. I agreed to stay with her for 10 days. Before leaving, I gave Daniel an emergency key. He said he would check the mail, water the plants, and make sure everything was secure. On the 3rd day of my trip, Brooke called. She asked how long I planned to stay. "Until Saturday." "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Ruth may need you longer." "Why?" "No reason, we're just trying to plan the week." I should have recognized the question for what it was. But Ruth was in pain, and I was tired. I did not think about it again until Thursday afternoon, when her neighbor offered to stay for the weekend. I decided to drive home early. I did not tell Daniel. The rain began near the state line. By the time I reached Asheville, the sky was dark. I stopped for groceries because I had been away for a week. Then I arrived at my house and discovered my key no longer worked. Brooke told me they had changed the locks. Daniel claimed Paul left him the house. I said all right and returned to my car. I drove to a small hotel near the highway. Only after locking the room door did I allow myself to cry. My son had not merely misunderstood paperwork. He had packed my life without telling me. Brooke had replaced my furniture. They had entered while I was away and treated my return as an inconvenience. I called Ruth. She listened in silence. Then she said, "The deed is here." "I know. Come back tomorrow." I just drove 4 hours. "Then drive to the attorney in the morning. I will overnight the documents." Paul's estate attorney was named Samuel Grant. I called his emergency number that evening. He answered from home. When I explained what had happened, he asked whether I was safe. "Yes." Do not try to enter the property tonight. It is my house. I understand, but we need to handle this carefully. He told me to bring identification, tax records, insurance documents, and anything else showing ownership. The next morning, I met him at his office. Samuel searched the county land records while I sat across from his desk. The online record showed exactly what Paul had told me. Evelyn Mercer, sole owner. The deed had been recorded 29 years earlier, after my mother's estate was settled. Paul's name did not appear anywhere in the ownership history. Samuel leaned back. Your son has no ownership claim through his father's estate. Can I change the locks back? Yes, but I recommend formal notice first. We need to document that they entered with limited permission and then excluded you. Are they tenants? Not based on what you've described. They moved in without your authorization while maintaining another residence, but we should avoid turning this into a physical confrontation. He asked whether anything had been removed. I did not know. That was the worst part. I had seen only a portion of the hallway. Samuel prepared a written demand giving Daniel and Brooke 24 hours to restore my access, return all keys, stop making changes, and provide an inventory of anything removed. He also contacted the sheriff's civil office to document the situation. No one rushed to arrest my son. No one needed to. This was an ownership and access dispute that required evidence and careful steps. Ruth's package arrived the following morning. Inside was the metal file box. The original deed rested in a clear protective sleeve. My mother's signature appeared near the bottom. So did the seal of the county clerk who recorded it. There were also probate documents from my parents' estate, property tax receipts, and a letter Paul had written to Daniel but never sent. I read that letter in Samuel's office. Daniel, a home is not inherited merely because you expect it. The farmhouse belongs to your mother. It came from her parents, and I have never held title to it. I hope you will receive it someday because you have remained part of her life and respected her choices. But if you pressure her, frighten her, or treat her grief as a chance to gain control, you will prove that you are not ready to receive what you are waiting for. Your mother's security comes before your expectations. Dad. I closed my eyes. Paul had known. Not exactly what would happen. But enough. Samuel asked, do you want this included with the notice? No. Why not? I want Daniel to explain himself before he hears his father's explanation. That afternoon, Samuel and I drove to the house. A deputy from the civil office met us there, not to remove anyone, but to keep the exchange calm and record the restoration of access. Daniel opened the door. When he saw Samuel, his expression changed. Brooke appeared behind him. She looked less confident than she had 2 nights earlier. Samuel introduced himself and handed Daniel the notice. Daniel scanned it. This is a family matter. It is an ownership matter, Samuel said. My father left me the house. Your father did not own the house. Brooke stepped forward. He was Evelyn's husband. He lived here for decades. Residence does not automatically create title. She looked at me. You told us it was a family home. It was. Then how can it belong only to you? Because family and ownership are not the same thing. Daniel read the notice again. Mom, you brought a lawyer and a deputy to your own son. You changed the locks on your own mother. He looked away. Samuel asked for a new key. Brooke said they had not made a spare. The locksmith they had hired was called back. Within an hour, my access was restored. I entered the house with Samuel and the deputy. The damage was not structural, but it was personal. My living room furniture had been moved into the barn. Paul's chair was wrapped in plastic. Our photographs were stacked face down inside a box. My clothes had been removed from the main bedroom and placed in the upstairs guest room. Brooke's clothes filled my closet. The drawers beside my bed contained her jewelry. They had turned Paul's study into a design office. Samples covered his desk. His old inspection notebooks had been thrown into a cardboard box marked discard. I picked up the box. Daniel watched me. We were going to store those. Why does the box say discard? He had no answer. In the kitchen, 2 cabinet doors had been removed. Blue tape marked a wall Brooke wanted demolished. A contractor's estimate lay on the counter. The proposed renovation cost $280,000. The financing section referred to proceeds from the sale of Daniel and Brooke's house, plus a planned line of credit secured by the farmhouse. I held up the estimate. You intended to borrow against this property. Brooke answered. After the title transferred. There was never going to be a transfer. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Mom, we thought Dad's will gave me his share. He had no share. That doesn't make sense. I removed the original deed from the file box. It makes perfect sense. I placed it on the kitchen table. Daniel stared at it. Brooke read the first page, then the second. Her face became pale. This is old, she said. That is why it is called the original deed. There could be another deed. There isn't, Samuel said. The county record confirms current ownership. Daniel looked at me. Dad never told me. He tried. I handed him Paul's letter. My son read it standing beside the table where he had eaten breakfast as a child. His eyes moved slowly across the page. When he reached the final sentence, his shoulders dropped. Your mother's security comes before your expectations. For a moment, I saw shame in his face. Then Brooke took the letter from him. This proves nothing except that Paul was trying to control what happened after his death. I looked at her. No, the deed proves ownership. The letter explains his fear. We put money into this place. How much? She hesitated. We paid the locksmith, we moved furniture, we bought materials. You spent money changing a house you did not own. Because Daniel was told he would inherit it. Someday is not today. Brooke crossed her arms. So what do you expect us to do? Leave. Daniel looked up. Mom, you have your own house. We listed it. My stomach tightened. You did what? Brooke answered. We accepted an offer last week. They had moved into my house because they had already sold theirs. Their business debts were worse than I knew. The sale proceeds were meant to pay creditors and finance the farmhouse renovation. They had planned to use my home as both their residence and their next major project. Daniel stepped toward me. We thought we were protecting the property. You changed the locks while I was caring for my sister. We knew you would fight us. Then you knew you did not have permission. Silence. That was the truth none of them could escape. This had not been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding would have involved a phone call. They changed the locks because they expected resistance and wanted control before I returned. Samuel explained that they needed to vacate. I gave them 7 days. Legally, I could have demanded they leave sooner. Emotionally, I wanted them gone immediately. But Daniel was still my son. 7 days was enough time to find temporary housing and remove their belongings. Brooke became furious. You are putting your own child on the street. No, I am asking 2 adults who sold their house to leave property they entered without permission. We have nowhere to go. You have money from your sale. Most of it is already committed. To what? She did not answer. Daniel did. Business debt. The amount was nearly $400,000. They had hidden it from everyone. The design studio had been losing money for more than a year. Their house sale would cover only part of what they owed. They believed renovating and refinancing my property would give them access to enough capital to survive. Paul's death had not caused their plan. It had accelerated it. I understood their fear. But fear did not create ownership. Over the next week, Daniel barely spoke to me. Brooke supervised movers as if I had betrayed them. She took the new furniture. I did not object. She removed her design samples and returned the cabinet doors. The wall remained standing. My belongings came back from the barn. Some items were damaged. Paul's chair had a tear along one side. Several framed photographs were cracked. Daniel offered to pay. I told him to begin by restoring everything he could. On the final day, Brooke stood on the porch with the last suitcase. You realize Daniel will never forgive you. I looked at her. For stopping you from taking my house. For choosing property over family. You changed the locks. We were trying to save our future. With mine. She looked toward the driveway where Daniel was loading their car. This place would have been ours eventually. That word has caused enough damage. She left without saying goodbye. Daniel remained. He stood near the apple tree where Paul and I had married. Did Dad really write that before he died? Yes. He thought I would do this. He thought grief might make boundaries unclear. Daniel stared at the ground. I believed him when he said the house would be mine. He said probably someday. He should have been clearer. You should have asked. Daniel's voice broke. I was scared. So was I. We were losing everything. And you decided I should lose my home first. He closed his eyes. I didn't think of it that way. That is the problem. He began to cry. Daniel had not cried at the funeral. He had not cried while we sorted Paul's clothes. Now he stood beneath the apple tree and wept because the plan he had built around his inheritance had collapsed. I loved him. That did not make him innocent. I allowed him to hug me. Then I watched him leave. The months that followed were difficult. Daniel and Brooke rented a small apartment. They closed the design studio. Brooke returned to work for another firm. Daniel found a job in warehouse management. They sold the luxury SUV. Their creditors agreed to payment plans. No one was arrested. No one lost everything overnight. Real consequences are often slower and less dramatic than people expect. They had to live within their means. They had to accept that my property could not rescue them. They had to rebuild without using my home as collateral. I made changes too. I installed a new security system. I revoked every emergency key except the one held by Ruth. I placed the farmhouse into a revocable trust. The trust guaranteed my right to live there for the rest of my life and gave clear instructions about what would happen after my death. Daniel was no longer set to inherit the house directly. Instead, the property would be sold. Part of the proceeds would support a housing program for widows facing displacement. The remainder would be divided between Daniel and a local preservation nonprofit. I did not remove him completely. I wanted accountability, not revenge. But I also wanted the house to do something more meaningful than reward the belief that waiting long enough creates ownership. For nearly 9 months, Daniel and I spoke only occasionally. Brooke did not contact me. Then, on Paul's birthday, Daniel came to the house alone. He carried a small wooden box. Inside were the damaged family photographs, repaired and reframed. He had also restored Paul's old inspection notebooks. I should have protected these, he said. Yes. I should have protected you. I did not answer. He sat at the kitchen table. The same table where he had once asked to borrow against the house. I kept telling myself Dad wanted me to have this place, he said. It made everything we did feel temporary. What do you mean? I thought we were only taking control early. That is still taking control. I know. He looked toward the hallway. When you came home and your key didn't work, what did you think? I considered the question. I thought my son had decided I was easier to remove than to persuade. His face twisted. I am sorry. The apology was quiet. No explanations. No mention of business debt. No attempt to blame Brooke. That was the first apology I believed. I love you, I said, but I do not trust you with this house. He nodded. You shouldn't. We began again from there. Not as though nothing had happened. Because something had. Trust does not return when people agree to forget. It returns when they agree to remember accurately. Daniel visits now. He knocks. He does not use a key. When something needs repair, I decide who handles it. Sometimes I ask him. Sometimes I hire someone else. Brooke has visited twice. She apologized once, although her apology still contained more explanation than regret. I accepted the words without restoring access. Forgiveness is not the same thing as returning someone to the position where they harmed you. The farmhouse remains mine. The apple trees still bloom each spring. Paul's chair sits beside the fireplace. The repaired photographs are back on the wall. I kept one broken frame exactly as it was. Inside, it is a photograph of Daniel at 7 years old, sitting on the porch steps with his father. The crack runs between them. I could replace it. I have chosen not to. It reminds me that damage can be acknowledged without becoming the only thing you see. The original deed is no longer at Ruth's house. It is stored in a secure box at the bank, along with the trust documents and Paul's letter. I keep a certified copy in my study. Not because I expect another argument. Because ownership should never depend on who speaks with the most confidence. My daughter-in-law changed the locks while I was away. She rearranged my furniture, emptied my closet, and marked my kitchen walls for demolition. My son stood beside her because he believed an expected inheritance had already become his property. They thought grief had made me powerless. They thought age had made me easy to relocate. They thought a promise about someday mattered more than a recorded deed today. They were wrong. I did not need to scream on the porch. I did not need to break a window. I did not need to invent a dramatic punishment. I needed the truth. The original deed showed where the house came from. The county records showed who owned it. My husband's letter showed what he feared. And my son's actions showed why those protections had been necessary. People sometimes say a house is only wood, stone, and paint. That may be true when you are discussing construction. It is not always true when you are discussing a life. That farmhouse held my childhood, my marriage, my husband's final days, and the future I still had the right to choose. Protecting it was not choosing property over family. It was refusing to let family use love as a path to ownership. My son believed the house was his because he expected to inherit it. My daughter-in-law believed changing the locks would make the decision permanent. But a changed lock does not change a deed. Confidence does not change a deed. Need does not change a deed. And family expectation does not change a deed. The day I returned to my home and found myself locked outside, I felt old, foolish, and completely alone. The day I walked back through that door with the original deed in my hand, I remembered something important. I was not waiting for permission to return. I was the owner coming home,